All right. It is 6 o'clock and it seems like folks are still arriving, but I've got a lot of things to say. So I think I will kick us off for the evening.
Oh, someone said we are live. They can see us?
Oh, yes.
Yeah.
Oh, they can.
Oh, yes.
I didn't realize that.
We're here. Hello. My gosh, from Melbourne. That is so exciting. So glad you're here. All right, here we go. Here we go. Okay. Good evening, everyone. I'm Ariel Cates. I'm the Director of Programming at Village Preservation. I am so glad that you are all here. Just a little bit about Village Preservation. We have been documenting, celebrating, and fighting for the preservation of Greenwich Village, the East Village, and NoHo since 1980. We work to expand and extend landmark and zoning protections and stop inappropriate development, while also encouraging appropriate development in our neighborhoods. We host roughly 75 programs a year, all of which are now virtual, and most of which are free and open to the public. Our events are meant to illuminate the cultural and architectural heritage, history, and depth, and the value of preservation in our communities. We are a nonprofit, membership-based organization, so your involvement and support mean the world to us. You can learn more at our wonderful new website, villagepreservation.org, and please consider becoming a member or making a donation if you're able at villagepreservation.org/donate. So tonight we are thrilled to be bringing together many aspects of our work at Village Preservation, all in this neat little package. Village Preservation has been involved with Westbeth for the entirety of our 40 years, as Westbeth itself celebrates its 50th birthday this year. In November of 2008, we placed one of our many historic plaques on Westbeth in recognition of its incredible role in our neighborhoods. And additionally, 2 of our speakers this evening have been awarded Village Awards from Village Preservation and have also been subjects of Village Preservation's Oral History Project. Ralph Lee and George Kaminsky's Oral Histories join interviews with some of the great artists, activists, business owners, community leaders, and preservation pioneers of Greenwich Village, the East Village, and NoHo. Our oral histories capture and preserve their first-person perspective on important histories they witnessed or of which they were a part. And in celebration of all of these very special things, we are also joined by Christina Maile, who I hope someday will join the ranks of our oral histories. There are lots of links about all of this, the Village Awards and our oral histories and our historic plaque program, which I will put into the chat very soon. And in the meantime, just a little bit of Zoom protocol. I am here with my wonderful colleague, Lena. Hi, Lena. And though we won't be visible during the event, we will be here in the chat. Say hi, tell us where you're joining from, or raise any issues. But if you have questions specifically for Christina, Ralph, or George, please use the Q&A function, which you can do at any point during the talk, and we will get to as many of those as possible. So without further ado, I am so pleased to introduce tonight's speakers. They are going to speak one at a time to start off with before we will start our conversation with all 3 of them. So I'm going to introduce them one at a time as well. So Ralph is up first. Ralph Lee is a puppeteer and founder of the famed Village Halloween Parade in 1974. He also served as artistic director of the award-winning Meadowy River Theater Company and has been an artist in residence at the Cathedral of St. John the Divine since 1984. He has also been recipient of countless awards, grants, residencies, and much more. So, Ralph, I'm going to be sharing slides during this, so please bear with us. And I'm gonna do that now, and I'm gonna take my video off, and you can get us started, Ralph. Thanks, everyone.
Should I start?
Absolutely.
Okay. Well, in 1970, here's, I guess I'm going to talk about these slides. This is a picture from the beginning of the first Halloween parade. We're on the steps of the old hotel that's on James Street, which was functioning as the theater for the new city's space in those days. And those are two figures of mine who are going to lead the parade, and I'm there with black hair, accompanying them down the steps. Let's see, these two figures were made for dance events originally. Dances by a dancer named Don Redlick. And we both, I take that back. Oh, well, we're on, during the parade, we had various kinds of characters stationed along the route. Here we have a dancer from some India or someplace on the steps of a brownstone, which I can't quite identify at the moment. We had a lot of people stationed along the route. And the idea was, here we have people on fire escapes, which we wanted to change the atmosphere in the streets and populate it with unlikely individuals. And so we would use whatever spaces we could find to do that. These are a bunch of fishwives who are kind of rowdy old women. And they would have certain activities that they would engage in during the course of the parade. So they were not just standing there. They have thought out some kind of vignettes for themselves. Okay, let's move on. Here is one of my more popular figures. It's the pig beast, two-headed pig beast. He was originally made for the play of Sam Shepard's. And in the parade, in the play, he would come on and demolish everything that happened on stage. However, Sam changed the play at some point, and excluded the pig beast. But then when he saw my sketch for it, he said, well, I guess I'm going to write it back in. And the pig beast is here in the parade, confronting a very fearless little individual. A lot of interaction with people in the parade and people watching the parade. And most of it was very positive and would initiate all kinds of joyful ways of interchanging. Okay, shall we move on? Here's my son Josh on the roof of Westbeth we had made this kind of crazy moth-like creature that flew across the courtyard of Westbeth just while people were still gathering in the Westbeth courtyard. I think he had some kind of a piece of fireworks attached to his tail, so he would be smoking as he moved across. He was the first of many critters that I made for the parade itself. Let's see. Yeah, there he is in motion. By this time, the courtyard of Westbeth would be full of people. And so they were excited to see something happening. Let's move on. Yeah, my Josh, my son, also later on started rappelling down the wall of Westbeth. This is the west wall of the courtyard. He came out of the window door on the side of the building and is rappelling down. As time went on, he got this idea of having a different kind of costume on. And let's look at what that is. Can we move on? Here he is dressed in this costume. It was a sort of a bug, and he would rappel down, and his ass would actually be the head of the bug, so that it would look like it was going down head first. And the thing on his head at this point was the tail of the beast. Let's move on to the next shot. So there he is, just leaving in his bug costume. And I think there's another shot of him further up. Yeah, there he is, halfway down. One night he did get stuck halfway down and somehow managed to retrieve himself. But you can never tell what's going to happen. Let's move on. Here we are in the courtyard of Westbeth. This you're looking at a snake with 13 pieces. It was originally made for a 4th of July event that took place down on the steps of Federal Hall. At the front of each of these sections is a sort of grouchy looking founding father. And during the reading of the Declaration of Independence, these 13 sections, which represented the 13 colonies, would link up and lead a parade down to Battery Park. But we couldn't keep him stuck up in storage and brought him down to join the parade. Okay, let's continue. Well, this is kind of a photograph of me with various figures. Figure to that's sort of above me is the god of war. And he was made for a production of a play called Peace by Aristophanes. And in that, there was a scene between Peace and Greed. Both of them were giant puppets. But they were trying to be very charming to the audience. Okay, let's move on. Well, here we are in the midst of the parade. We're looking at costumes of 3 of the 4 seasons. Winter is on, I don't know if it's the left or he's looking out of the car, and to the side is summer, and the last one on the picture is spring. And they were made for another play that we did with a medley with the Needle Company. All right, let's move on. After we've been doing the parade for a while, I made these 7 sweepers, especially for the parade. They were performers on stilts, and they led the parade, and they had brooms, and they were sweeping the streets to get rid of the automotive vibes in the street and make it a suitable place for celebration. Move on now. Yeah, here they are in motion. These guys were really good at on their stilts, and nobody ever toppled down. My wife made these wonderful costumes in no time. It seemed they're all very complicated but beautiful, and were really appropriate for the still waters. Move on. Yeah, this is a spider that I made to wriggle up and down the tower over at the library on 10th Street, Jefferson Market Library. It's actually not in motion at the time, but it had 3 operators, one on the head and one on each set of legs. And it could move up and down the tower and be quite animated. Next slide. Next.
Ralph, what did you make the spider out of? Can I ask?
Well, the head of the spider is, it was a framework of rattan, a circular piece of rattan. And then over that was chicken wire, which was attached to that rattan. And on top of the chicken wire was some net, some fabric net. And that was, again, that was fastened to the chicken wire. And the 2 eyes are made out of the bases of bushel baskets. I cut the baskets in half, and that's what they were made out of. And then I had a pupil of the eye put into it. The rest of the designs on the head are pieces of cloth that were just sewed on to suggest the mouth. And the legs were sort of similar, pieces of short pieces of bamboo with cloth stuffed with with some kind of stuffing on them, and there were actually the ropes attached to the legs when the thing was being operated, so there was a lot of motion possible in the film. All right, move on. Here's yes, the skeleton was made specifically for the parade. He's about 40 feet long. Fortunately, my apartment was able to accommodate him when he was under construction. And he was carried in the parade, and had a bunch of operators, and they would sing this round, this old round called "Have you seen the ghost of Tom? Long white bone with his skin all gone. Oh, poor Tom, wouldn't it be true with no skin on?" And when we got this creature to Washington Square, we hoisted him up into the arch, and he could be operated by people on the top of the arch. So he just kind of danced when he was up there. I think there's a shot of that. Did we go by it, or is it yet to come? Next photo. Oh, yeah, there he is in the arch. And he fit nicely in that space. We were lucky to be able to gain access to the top of the arch. I don't know if they would still be willing to do that these days, but it was great to be able to have something of that scale up there. Okay, next. Oh, this is just a bunch of people up on the top of the arch. They were sort of in control of making everything happen. And we had this fat devil that slide down from the top of the arch into the fountain area on the right. There was a guy in a costume that was very thin. Then I had a dummy devil that did the actual sliding down. Okay. Yeah. Oh, and here we are at Westbeth during the 40th year anniversary. This is summer being greeted by a young man and his dad. Let's move on. More of that event. This rooster that I have made for an opera at the New York City Opera Company. Unfortunately, I retrieved and had a lot more work with me than it did in the opera. And I'm operating one of his windsops, which are just very lightweight nylon fabric made in the shape of this fish and put on the pole. And they're actually about my favorite figure to operate. You get a lot of mileage out of it. Okay, next. Yeah, another event, a part of this 40th event. I forget his name. He's a great musician up there playing during the event. And one of those figures is another version of Hades from one of the plays I did with the Meadowy Company and the woman is, what is her name? Abundance. And she was a character from a play called Keats. Okay, shall we move on? Here's another shot at the banks in summer and Windsor. Haze there, and a lot of happy people. Okay, let's move on. Let's move on. Now, we've managed to use Westbeth for many different purposes. We had my youngest daughter was married up on the roof of Westbeth. And it was wonderful to be able to have that space for a wedding. And here we are, mid-wedding, up on the top of Westbeth. Nice day. It was a very nice day. And here they are, bride and groom in the courtyard. And we're about to go up the street and get into the subway. And here are two of the figures that I made for the garden. This guy named the Dandy, and I forget what the other woman's name was. And the bag lady. She was made for an event up at Penn in college. And in front we've got a nest, sort of spider that was made for what? Archie. Oh, Archie and the Mythical. Another show. Okay, let's see. This is another bunch of figures in that window. Giant Leviathan and bits and pieces of beavers and other puppets. It's been great to have that space available. Okay, let's move on. Here's another shot of characters from shows. These three kids were from a Greek story, and they're surrounded by, well, let's see, two other characters from the next, well, three characters from the next. It was based on some ancient Greek puppet show called Hard Joseph's. And it's all about this sort of punchline who has all kinds of crazy, nasty adventure. All right. I think that's it. The photos.
That is it, Ralph. Is there anything else you would want to talk to us that wasn't covered in the photos? Talk to us about?
I'd just like to say a few things about Westbeth.
That would be great.
You know, it's been, I think it's made it possible for me to do a lot of these things. You know, we were able to use the community room as a dressing room for the parade all those years, and we were totally welcome into the courtyard for that event. I've had ample space in my studio here to build things. We've got storage space at the top of the building. And then to be able to use the guard booth has been a wonderful thing as well. So I really feel very grateful to Westbeth for allowing all of this to happen. I think that's about what I have to say. Thank you all for listening and watching.
Thanks, Ralph. All right, we will definitely talk to you more. We've got lots of questions already, but I am going to give the floor to Christina Maile, who co-founded the groundbreaking Westbeth Playwrights Feminist Collective, whose work is now in the collection of the New York Historical Society. She was the Deputy Director of Manhattan Construction for the New York City Parks Department. And she received many grants, fellowships, and her work has been featured in numerous publications, galleries, and collections. Recently, she was elected to the Westbeth Artist Housing Board of Directors. So, Christina, I will turn this over to you and I will share your slideshow. You're on mute, Christina.
Okay, is that good?
Yeah.
Am I good? Okay.
Yes.
Thank you, Ralph. That was fantastic. It brought back a lot of great memories. I'm a printmaker, a painter, a writer, and a landscape architect. I don't think, oh, that's some of my work now. I don't think I could have been any of those things if I hadn't been lucky enough to live at Westbeth. So I'm going to today speak about the arts at Westbeth. I moved in 1970. You can just keep moving. I can move it. Can I move it? Yeah, so this is some of the prints and paintings I've done. Can I move it along? No. Okay. So I moved in 1970 with my first husband, Tom, who was a painter. And okay, just leave it there for a minute. And because we had all these extra kids, Julian and Ethan, we were allowed to have a bigger apartment. And that allowed my husband to create a painting studio within the living room. In fact, a lot of the time in the early days was spent with people building walls and loft beds so that they could create workspaces within their apartments. This is really important because there were a lot of families, a lot of kids throughout this entire complex. There were a lot of young families that moved in. So kids and art, you can keep moving the slides. These are all photos by Leonard Freed, by the way. So you see building loft beds, building separations, because there were so many kids around, you had to like create some space for your work. In some cases, people would spend time painting on the roof. And in this case, there was a big fire on the pier. And this one guy, Barry, came up and painted the fire while the policeman reported. But that was kind of like this, really a lot of energy during that. Can I move the slide? Oh, you can move it forward. So there was a lot of energy. The time kids were surrounded by art, there were a lot of people doing stuff and helping and having the kids be involved with a lot of aspects of art making. In fact, I remember that Ralph used to allow kids into his own studio and let them play with some of the materials that he used. So here you go. There was a lot of, you could just keep moving this. So there was a lot of great artwork, kids, energy, and also protests going on. It was a big deal. This is a picture of the Westbeth Playwrights Feminist Collective. At the time, I'm not sure how it came about, but there was an announcement that went around and asked all of the Westbeth artists to divide up into disciplines and to figure out ways that they would present their art. So I joined the playwrights meeting. And at first the meetings were both men and women. But as the weeks passed, it turned out that the men, just really wanted to write about their own plays and produce their own plays, whereas the women wanted to speak about feminist issues, because at that time, women's lib was like a really hot topic. So eventually, the women in this group decided to do an evening of short feminist plays. And that's how, you can go on, and that's how the first evening we did was called Rapin'. And we were scheduled, it was so funny, we were scheduled for like Wednesday nights at 10 p.m. And even with that, we got these huge crowds in. So we knew that we had something to offer. We had two goals in mind. One was to write and present plays that were sharp and quick and satirical, but also loaded with elements of rebellion and meaning. And the second goal was to provide job opportunities for women backstage in those trades that men usually occupied. So we made sure that all of our backstage crew, the set designer, the set builder, the lighting person, the sound engineer, all were women. And they would then get some experience in theater so that they could apply that if they wanted to go on to other jobs in theater. So that was like these two goals we had as we moved along. You can go in. So these are some of the other things we did. We did a whole series of plays about famous feminists, and we did plays. We did productions in Little Church Around the Corner. We did it at Theater for New City. You can move along. And we also did plays in Westbeth itself, which was, fantastic, because they gave us, and if you'll notice, Danny DeVito was in our production, and Rhea Perlman, right? They were in the production of Up. In fact, if you go to the next photo, you'll see them, they're there. That's Danny and Rhea in our production of Up and Uppity Review. So if you want, we also did parades and poetry readings and tons of things. And then we all decided we were together for about 6 years, and then we all decided we wanted to live the philosophy that we were espousing. So I became a landscape architect, someone else went to school to become a lawyer, someone became a bishop of the Anglican Church, other went to filmmaker. So we, this collective not only wrote about feminist issues, we trying to become examples of how you could succeed in following, a dream of an occupation you might have wanted to have, and which was at the time closed to you. So you can move on. Oh yeah, we did all sorts of things. We had poetry readings, we had benefits, we had tons of stuff going on. And that's what was so important about Westbeth at the time, because we had, as Ralph pointed out, there were spaces we could do rehearsals, auditions, and we'd have readings and benefits. And I think that's what's important about Westbeth even today, the acknowledgement, the recognition that that not only is affordable housing is important to an artist's life, but affordable workspaces. So in Westbeth, there were all sorts of different workspaces. People work in their apartments. So that's an apartment working. You can move on. So there are different types. Some people are very neat, and others are really just take over the whole apartment. Then we also have, you can stay here for a second, we also have communal studios. And that's based on the fact that some ways of making art require special equipment. So we have a printmaking studio, and we used to have a sculpture studio because those required presses and special kinds of welding materials. So go ahead. We also, this is the printmaking studio, which was there from the very beginning. We have a litho press, we have an etching press, and this artist, the woman, is an artist we invited, a printmaker from Cuba. The printmakers have shows every couple of years, and we invite printmakers from around the world. And this woman, we got special, this was before Trump, but we got special release that she could get a visa from Cuba, and she came to the US and showed, and then she did some printmaking work in the shop. So you can go on. So that's the communal printmaking. We also have the Westbeth Artist Residents Council also recently inaugurated, I don't have a photo of it, a new ceramic studio, communal ceramic studio. And the musicians of Westbeth have now put together a communal music studio, which had been missing for years and years. There's also a communal painting studio. Go ahead. Yeah, this is a woodworking studio, and all the equipment that you need to do that. And this is an individual artist studio. So in addition to communal studios and working in your apartment, there's also studios that you can rent throughout the building affordably to do your work. So this is a separate studio. This used to be the old sculpture studio, and it was a fantastic place. There, you had enough room to have pieces of wood, my favorite material, and things, metal, and keep going, and all this, table saws and welding stuff. I mean, it was so great. You just walked in, and that's John Bausch's sculpture he did down, he created down there. Keep going, and they would have this show of whatever work was done in the studio. It's like in the courtyard, kind of on the courtyard level, and you could see some of the work that people did in the studio, in the sculptor studio just below. This was like their own little private gallery that people could see as they walked in and out of the inner courtyard. Go ahead. But when Hurricane Sandy came, that completely flooded the entire basement. So all of the studios, including the sculptor studio, was totally destroyed. And this has continued to be a really traumatic experience because people not only lost their studios, some of the artists lost their life's work. Rebuilding those studios in the basement is one of the challenges that Westbeth faces today to try to fund the rebuilding of them. So you can go on. I talked briefly about how the presentation of art. The Westbeth has two public arenas. One is the Westbeth Community Room, and the other is the Westbeth Gallery. The Westbeth Community Room, under the auspices of the Westbeth Artist Residents Council, sponsors readings. So there's readings, you can go on, readings. More readings. I didn't know it. Oh, film screening, and music performances. So there's, in addition to that, there's also Christmas parties, annual meetings, lots of things that, in fact, the community room is incredibly overworked because it's not only that, but also classes and workshops. So there's a need for, like, we're coming out of the seams. There's just so much need for space to present art. We also, luckily enough, have a Westbeth Gallery. And in the Westbeth Gallery, we feature the work of resident artists and non-resident artists, nationally known non-resident artists, in addition to the nationally known resident artists, as well as, that's one of the printmakers show, as well as the work that's presented by cultural institutions such as Parsons, the Sculptors Guild, the Women's Caucus of Art, the Quilted Network, and also the Whitney, which you just saw previously, the Whitney Museum Staff Show. Oh, this was an incredible show. This was a poetic computation. So there's all this kind of coding show with monitors and weird things going on with computers. That was like almost one of the last shows we did before COVID. Go ahead. We also do in the Westbeth Community Room, we have a program called the Westbeth Icon. And this program celebrates senior artists who have continued to pursue their art it's passionately, deeply, for years and years. Gloria Miguel, for example, a performance artist, a Native American of Native American heritage, is like 90 years old. And when she came to do an interview, she had just finished doing a tour of her piece in Canada somewhere. I mean, so the energy that the artists have here that, you know, transpires over decades is amazing. And Westbeth Icon celebrates the work of these people. We have had done, I think, about 10 or 12 of them. So what is this? Oh, yes. And then the gallery also has every year a show just devoted to the resident visual artists, and they show the work they've done that particular year. So this one was, again, one of the last shows before we had to close the gallery. And this is a quick look at the gallery. So there's all kinds of things going on. There's visual, there's painting. Go ahead. And there's more painting, and there's sculpture. I think that's a fabric thing. Oh, okay. So there are two, okay, you can hold this there for a second. There are two other things that happen in the gallery, and these are really two popular, very popular annual events. One is the Penn Literary Quest, and in that event, Penn authors from around the world go to read in individual Westbeth apartments, and in like kind of a salon setting. So this guy had just finished reading the book, or was just about to read the book, but see how people are sitting around. And so he finishes in about, he reads, he takes a few questions, then you go on to another apartment. You could go on to the next one, next slide. Another apartment, and then there's readings. And so the audience goes through the hallways, up and down the elevators, visiting apartments, hearing these world-famous, world-class authors read. And in the end, they all go back to the Westbeth Gallery. Okay, not yet. Okay, the Westbeth Gallery, and we have, champagne and cheese whiz or something, and where you get to talk to the authors and to answer, to ask questions. It's a really fantastic event. Then the next event is this, which is Westfest, which was co-founded by that guy over there, George Kaminsky and Carol Nolte. And what this is every year, and I think this is the 10th year, would have been the 10th year, they do have a virtual event that I'll talk about, is that dancers and they perform in various parts of the complex, in the hallways, stairways. They perform in the boiler room. You see the boiler room. In the Westbeth Flea Market, you can move a slide. That's the Westbeth Flea Market. They perform in there. They perform on the roof. They perform in the recycling area. They also, once I remember, they performed over the years, I can't remember which year it was, but a set of dancers went into the deepest, darkest recesses of the basement and performed this incredible dance around a very large puddle. It was like so memorable. And so once again, when we do this again, you will also be able to walk through all of these nooks and crannies of Westbeth and see these incredible dancers adapting the space to their movements, adapting the movement to their space. You can go on. Yeah, and also Westfest also takes place on the top floor. They call it the top floor. And this, I think, is when Merce Cunningham was there. And this is now the space Martha Graham is. So this dance, so there's also this kind of more formalized dance, which takes place in the auditorium at the top of Westbeth. So you can move on. And this is also part of Westbeth. Mm-hmm. We also have, the artists have also produced anniversary festivals, music festivals, poetry and film screening festivals. There's also classes and workshops. There's one that's incredibly popular called You're Never Too, You're Never Too Old to Play. I was going to say You're Never Too Young to, You're Never Too Old to Play. And it's a storytelling workshop for seniors, and it's been just acclaimed everywhere. So but in addition to all of this, so this is Madeleine Odelay Nelson playing at one of the music festivals. In addition to all of this, there's living at Westbeth and living in the arts at Westbeth. There's also these casual encounters. You'll see paintings going in and out of elevators. You'll hear people rehearsing music behind closed doors. There'll be sculpture that are lurking in the hallways. There are people putting up posters and flyers in the bulletin boards about the books that they've published, or articles that have been written in magazines, or shows that they're in, not in gallery, but in other places. So there's like this constant synergy going on, which you can all find out about. Okay, you can move on. In the westbeth.org website. And this shows you all of the stuff I've talked about, the events, the history, the icons, and all sorts of things. If you can, if you want, sign up for an e-blast and find out about all the events. We've now done a lot more virtual events because of COVID, but those are almost equally as interesting as being here. I have just one last thing. You can go to the next slide. There's another side to the artist life at Westbeth. I've shown you like the manifest side, the expressive side, but there's also the side that deals with financial insecurity, deals with, doubts about creativity. Where will the next painting come from? Where the poetry, how to move forward in your art. That's a big part of living an artist's life. There's emotional turbulence, there's family issues, there's COVID, there's health issues that people have, there's disability, and because of all the years that have passed, there were also the deaths of friends and neighbors. So which leads me to think that of all the arts I have described here, it is the art of community, the support and understanding and empathy that people have for each other as they negotiate the ordinary and extraordinary aspects of their lives, which has contributed so greatly to the success of Westbeth over these past 50 years and to the years to come. Thank you.
Thanks, Christina. That just was so wonderful. Okay. All right, George. Here we go. George Kaminsky served on the Westbeth Artist Residents Council for 21 years, 17 of them as its president. An active volunteer and fundraiser for God's Love We Deliver, AIDS Ride, and the Elizabeth Glaser Pediatric AIDS Foundation, George also helped lead Westbeth and its residents through the incredibly difficult recovery from Superstorm Sandy, which I was there. I remember people pulling their life's work out of that basement, and it just was absolutely heartbreaking. And George is currently running the Emergency Response Committee at Westbeth to help residents cope with COVID-19. So, George.
Hi, all. Christina and Ralph, thank you for your presentation. I'm about to give you a crash course on Westbeth. This is 50 years of Westbeth in 10 minutes. So here goes. For those of you that don't know, Westbeth was originally built by Western Electric for their Bell Labs. And And then in the mid-1960s, they moved out to a facility in New Jersey. The National Endowment for the Arts wanted to start a housing project for artists, decided it would be in New York, and the National Endowment, in teaming up with the J.M. Kaplan Fund, decided that it would be here at this location. They hired a young architect named Richard Meyer. He did the conversion from industrial to residential use. And Joan Davidson was our first board of directors chair, and she literally propelled Westbeth into existence. Westbeth opened in 1970. So I'm going to talk about Westbeth in the decades. In our first decades, unfortunately, revenues did not meet expectations, especially in relation to our commercial spaces. It was originally hoped that our commercial spaces, the income from them would subsidize the residential rents. That did not come to pass. So that in 1972, we had our first rent strike at Westbeth. But there were other good things that happened at the same time in that first decade. Our gallery was started. Christina told you about many of the other things that happened, the Feminist Collective, many musical and theater performances, and the Halloween Parade that Ralph presented. We also had, in the 70s, the Sculpture Studio opened, which was a fantastic space, as Christina said. But the 80s and 90s, I will call kind of like a long slog for Westbeth. There was a lot of crime in the area. We had a lot of break-ins in cars. There was muggings, there was prostitution, and much of that was related to the crack epidemic that was in New York at that time. It got so bad in our neighborhood that we formed an organization called BABA 12, which was Bank, Bethune, and 12th Street. And we raised funds so that we could hire a private security van to go around the 3 blocks, particularly at night, so that when residents were returning home, they would not get mugged, and so that the cars would not get broken into. And there was less interaction between residents as their children grew up and they went off to college and they moved out. And in some ways, I believe artists were looking more inward to concentrate on their work. And during this time, we also had the constant threat of foreclosure. In 1980, Ronald Reagan was elected, and HUD at that time was trying to get rid of many of the properties that they held the mortgage for. And Westbeth was one that HUD held the mortgage. And from the early 1980s to the early 1990s, the threat of foreclosure from HUD was constantly there. That did not go away until the Clinton administration came in, and we did a refinancing of the mortgage, which just extended it for a number of years with HUD. But then when we got into the new century, we had a much more active residence council and committees on the council. You may recognize a few faces there. Christina was one of our spearheads in moving the residence council forward. And our social media face is solely due to the work and the efforts of Christina. And the more active residence council led to a more active tenant body. And by that, I mean that we became more engaged with our local elected officials, and we became more engaged with our surrounding community by presenting programming that was open and welcoming to them. So this is us with Corey Johnson. If you'll move on, we held a town hall here with Jerry Nadler. And then some of the programming we presented to and for the community. Every year for the last 8 years, we've had free flu shots here in the community room. And we were also the center of when they were looking to take away the Abington Loop on the M14 bus. We organized and held the rallies and the organizing efforts, which actually saved the Abington Loop of the M14 bus. And as Christine went on, and we're just going to run through these, all of our committees, the literary, the performing, and the visual arts, began to present more and more programming that we produced and we put out and presented to the public. Keep going through. These are all some of the many events that were sponsored by the Residents Council. This was that was a play that was actually written and directed, written by a Westbeth resident. It's called Lost and Found, written by a Westbeth resident, directed by a Westbeth resident. It was about the flood that we had here, Sandy, in 2012. This was a gallery show that also dealt with the loss of art during Sandy. Some of the other things we did was that we found funding for items that were beneficial to our residents, but at the same time, we welcomed our local community into them. Things like the Feldenkrais class, strength training, and then the class that Christina talked about, you're never too old to play. So some of our more popular items, Christina has already talked about. Our Icon project, which recognizes our senior artists. We can just run through these. Black Eyed Susan, Ralph, Jack Davidson. This is from the Westfest Dance Festival. This is at the top floor, keep going. And then these are some more images of the dance festival and being site specific, but obviously this year we could not do it. This is our 10th year. So we're going to virtual this year, and this weekend we will actually be presenting the Westfest Dance Festival. It will be live streaming, so if you go to our website, you'll get the details on that. And each of the choreographers will be presenting their work in a site that they have chosen. But we still have one Westbeth contingent, the Martha Graham Dance Company. Some of their members will be presenting live from Westbeth in the Martha Graham studio on the 11th floor here at Westbeth. Christina already told you about Penn. One of my favorite memories is that Colson Whitehead read in my apartment one of the years of the Penn event. So I mean, it's amazing the authors that we have had here at Westbeth for that. And the last item that we've done that's been new in this century has been Open House New York, where we take people on tours of the building, and these tours are led by Westbeth residents. On an average weekend, over 2,500 people visit Westbeth on that weekend. Now, at the same time, we do Westbeth Open Studios, and as you can see here, these are all the artist studios that were open that year, and you could visit each of these artists in their individual studios. Unfortunately, we could not do that this year, but we went virtual. So we did a video of the entire tour, and then we went to 10 of the artist studios and did video of that. And you can watch that online at westbeth.org. And each of this, no segment in that tour is more than 5 minutes. So you can do the entire tour in 45 minutes, and then you can spend 5 minutes with each of the artists. You can find that online at westbeth.org. Some of the observations I've had about Westbeth and living here, it is a magical place. There is no place else like it on this earth. There are some wonderful artists that are incredibly kind and generous. Yes, we do have some cranky people, and yes, we do have some people that are slightly entitled, but that is no more and probably much less than the general public. But most of all, it is a community. I believe that long-term residency builds community, both personally and artistically. Some of the challenges that we've had, and Christina mentioned that, if we can go on, we were hit very badly by Sandy. This is our basement flooding. It wiped out all 63 artist studios that were in the basement. That included the work of artists, recording studios, all the instruments were down there. Everything was wiped out. What you see here are what we did to try to salvage some of that work. We raised funds to take some of it to a drying unit out in New Jersey. But still, many, many people lost all of their work or most of their work in that flood. If you keep going on this, these are more sandy photos of the art drying in our community room and in our gallery. Right now, the latest thing that we've been facing, obviously, is the pandemic. We formed an emergency response committee. We have floor captains. Everyone is in on this, the residents, our staff, our management, our board, and we've provided masks, safety glasses, food. People go and pick up medications for residents. And even in some instances in the early days when people had to get to appointments for emergency reasons, we had people that volunteered to drive them. So it is an amazing place, and everyone comes together, particularly at a time of challenge. But what are the challenges that are facing Westbeth in the next 50 years? I do serve on the board of directors with Christina, and from a corporate perspective, the board and management may change, but the residents stay the same. And that can lead to conflict sometimes when you have a new team that comes in. But I'm really happy to report that our current board, our CEO, our new management are working well with the tenants, and that is always a good thing. Westbeth has always been solvent, although we have tinkered on the edges in the 80s and 90s close to bankruptcy. But solvent is different than sound. We have enough to meet our expenses, but we've never had a cushion or an endowment that would help us cover the costs of major capital improvements, things like the roof, the facade, plumbing, and other structural needs. Now, our board is tasked with the task of making sure that Westbeth is viable for the long term as an artist community. And their task is made more difficult when you're dealing with infrastructure that is at least 50 years old, and in many cases, more than 100 years old. The facade, the windows, the plumbing. Our artists are also aging in place. And how do we best serve their needs during this time? And how do we prepare to serve artists of the future while we still are serving the artists of today? Those are the challenges that Westbeth is facing. They have faced them over the last 50 years admirably. There were many times that people thought that we were going to disappear. We did not, and I can assure you, we are not going to disappear for the next 50 years and longer. But our challenge right now is to make sure we put things in place that will allow us to continue for those next 50 years. Thank you for your time and attention.
Thank you all so much. Okay. All right, everybody, this is the time to ask questions. We've got a few, so I'm gonna kick us off with these. Let's see. Ralph, this question is for you. Phyllis, who I saw in one of George's pictures, I think, wanted to know, where are all of your puppets now? It looks like there's one behind you.
Yes. Where are the others?
Well, there are some of them live with us in our apartment, but and when I first moved in, I spotted this room at the top of Westbeth that I believe was sort of like the it was part of the elevator system, sort of the workspace for one of the elevators. And I was very attracted to this space. I was a family of 5 at that point, and I thought, oh, this is a place I could go and be by myself. I did do some work up there, but I also started to use it as a storage.
For me, a long time I was worried about, well, finally I went to management and said, could I have this space? They gave it to me for 19 years with no rent. Now I pay rent, but it's minimal. And this place is packed with various kinds of materials and also a lot of puppets. We have a, with our, we do have, my wife and I do have a place up in the country. It functions as a home base for our theater company. And we have a lot of stuff stored in barns and places like that up there. And some of it is in the professional storage space out in Brooklyn. But it's always a problem. And you never know when you're going to want to use one of these characters. Some of them we've just let go of and said, you've been around long enough, goodbye. But so many of them, well, they're like children or family members. You keep thinking they can be useful sometimes. So it's a constant challenge, but somehow we're under control.
Thanks. And Eileen wanted to know the picture that you showed of the bat that was flying over the courtyard. What year was that?
Oh Lord, that was probably, we did it for several years, but it was maybe around the 6th year or so. Through the late 70s. Yeah.
Amazing. Okay, let's see. Phyllis also wants to know about the theater at Westbeth. That used to be the Labyrinth Theater. Is there something in there now?
The Labyrinth left with the death of Philip Seymour Hoffman. And there was a theater that took over the old sculpture studio. And when work began on Build It Back, which is this work that is sponsored by HUD, it's a job that helps prevent flooding or the damage of flooding from Sandy. So when they began working in the basement, Build It Back, this new theater company called Collapsible Whole is now in that space temporarily, but Labyrinth is no more. I mean, I'm not sure what happened to them, but they're no longer at Westbeth.
Thanks. We have a lot of questions about living at Westbeth and sort of the logistics of that. How did you come to live there? How do people come to live there who don't live there already? Are the apartments rentals? Can they be passed between family members? How long does it take to get an apartment there? Many questions of this nature.
I'll answer, and then George will take out the more legal aspects. But in the beginning, it was pretty simple to apply. There was an application process. They had put ads in the newspapers, which is how I found out. Well, I found out about it through, there was an architect who worked with Richard Meyer called Todd Williams, who was the first cousin of my ex-husband. And so he told us about Westbeth, but also there was ads in the newspaper about it as well. And so it was relatively easy to apply. It didn't take long. You generally have to show you have to have a portfolio, but they don't judge you on your portfolio. They judge you on the references you have, whether you've had gallery shows, whether you're a member of SAG or any kind of professional affiliation. And that's pretty much remained the same through the years. The only difference is that nowadays we had a waiting list, and the waiting list extended to about 15 years, and there were hundreds of people on it. So 15 years ago, we closed the waiting list because there was no point accepting applications because there was no way they would get in. All the people that were currently on that waiting list would still have to show, because it's affordable housing, you still have to show that your income met the requirements of affordable housing. So recently, because as George talked about, there's been a lot of deaths and vacancies in the apartment. We opened up the waiting list last year, and for like maybe a month, and it was administered by the actor studio, who does all those kinds of things, but following the same kind of requirements that we had before, 3 references, for income requirements. And we had thousands of submissions. So the waiting list is now closed again. There are hundreds of people on the waiting list now. And slowly but surely, we are opening up 3 bedrooms, 2 bedroom studio apartments to various people.
I will just add, we are a rental.
Right.
It is, yeah, it is an artist building. So the Residents Council and the board want to keep it an artist building. There are some New York City laws that if a person can get the apartment from a family member if they are living here when that person passes away. We do not encourage that. I mean, we follow the law completely, but we want it to be for working artists. We don't want an attorney who is a child to come back in all of a sudden to get the apartment. So we want this to be an artist housing in perpetuity, but we still have to follow New York City rent laws because we are under rent stabilization.
George, how did you find Westbeth?
I had a very special admissions committee of 1. I met my partner, John, who is now my husband, 38 years ago, and I moved in 37 years ago. That admissions list is closed too.
Very important. Let's see. How is Westbeth funded now?
Westbeth is funded through the monies that we generate from rental, both commercial and residential. We do not, people say, are we a subsidized building? We are not subsidized by any government agency, like every year they give us $500,000. We do have some tenants whose rents are subsidized, that they are on Section 8. But that is based on the tenant. It's not based on, we are not guaranteed that we're going to have those funds. Otherwise, everything we do, we have to generate the funds from our income unless we get a grant, as we did for Build It Back. Mm-hmm. But the monies are self-generated.
Mm-hmm. Okay, thanks. I'm just curious if I know you talked a little bit about sort of trying to set up ways to keep people safe in the neighborhood in the past. I'm guessing that is quite different from the neighborhood of the present. I'm wondering if what sort of reflections you have on just how the area surrounding Westbeth has changed over the years.
It has changed enormously. I mean, there's still, it's the city, so there's still things going on. But I do remember when I first moved in, there was a men's house of detention down the block, and every now and then you would hear sirens. And someone told me later that there was no such thing as the men's house of detention. And I firmly believe there still was, because I still remember the sirens. But as George said, they were, we had security guards, and we also had people who, the residents walked around the building, keeping track of what might happen. But right now it's more the expense of living here, the expense of the grocery stores, supermarkets, the expense of the restaurants around here. It's really changed a lot in that way, and it's lost a lot of its edginess, a lot of its strangeness. We've always been an island, and we're still remaining an island within like a really changed neighborhood.
When I first moved in, the highway was still over the river, and underneath the highway there was parking, and there were all these warehouses that went out into the water, which a lot of nefarious things went on in, I'm sure. I used to go scavenging out there, and I found some great stuff. But it was really a no man's land. You could park a car underneath the highway, but you would not necessarily be sure that it wouldn't be molested by the time you wanted to use it. I used to be able to ride a bicycle down on the highway to get my unemployment insurance. I can remember when I first moved in, there were still horses in a stable about 5 blocks below here. And I went and got some horse manure to use to help my plants survive. And I think when I first moved in, the railway still went through Westbeth and out the other side. So a lot of things have changed, and kind of gradually. And I'm glad it's a little more civilized now.
Well, I describe Westbeth as an island of old bohemian Greenwich Village in a sea of wealth.
Yes. Yeah.
Compared to when Westbeth opened in the very beginning, they had trouble getting people to come all the way over here. They thought it was far from any facilities, but it was also incredibly dangerous. And there was that period where we went where it wasn't so dangerous and we were all thrilled, but that didn't stay very long. And then all of a sudden, we used to have 6 Chinese restaurants within 2 blocks, and now we have none.
Well, we're surrounded. The income of most of the people in this neighborhood must be astronomical.
One of our residents is afraid of her caregiver.
Oh.
Okay, sorry.
That's what community looks like.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, she won't go back into her apartment. I have a chair down there. She's sitting in the chair. We're waiting for another person she might trust rather than the one who's there now.
So tough. Well, Christina, Julian has been here with us in the chat and mentioned that there are no Chinese restaurants left.
I know, it used to be about 5 or 6 of them.
They were kind of family restaurants. You could just take your family there and not, feel that you were gonna have to go broke. But now it's like we're this strange island surrounded by all this incredible wealth.
Yeah. Yeah. A question about Sandy. Everything. Well, Scott wants to know, has anything been done regarding future flooding, which I know many things have been done.
Yes, we got a grant from HUD for $40 million, and it's been a construction project for the last 3 years. And what they've done is preventative construction to prevent, not to prevent the flood, but to prevent any future damages from a future flood. So HUD has put, the work includes raising the boilers up, up on the second floor, raising the generators, putting in new water pumps so that we don't lose water, resealing the courtyard, fixing the damage to the footings. Really a whole lot of work that's taken a really long time, but hopefully will safeguard us from a flood in, what they call a 100-year flood.
Here's hoping. Yeah. So that's about it for our questions, and we're pushing an hour and a half. So I think I will call it here. Okay. But I'm so grateful to the three of you. I'm so grateful for your art and your community work and all of the things that you have told us about this evening. I'm so grateful to everyone who's here. Thank you so much for coming. I put many links in the chat, and I will put them in our follow-up email as well. So please keep an eye out for that. Okay. And learn lots more things about Westbeth. I can't wait to go back in person. And we are getting many thanks from our participants. So lots of gratitude. And
thank you, Mom.
Thank you to Village Preservation for presenting us.
Oh,
thank you very much.
Yeah, it's such a pleasure. Take really good care.
Okay.
All right.
Okay.
Bye-bye.
Talk to you soon.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you all for coming.